Hi everyone, and welcome to my first ever digital sketch review, and this is for summer of 2019. And basically I'm taking all the drawings that I drew on my iPad Pro, more specifically Procreate, and I am compiling a mega cut of all the time lapses that they gave me for each of my drawings, and I'm going to be talking about each as we're reviewing them. So I'm always going to be having two going at the same time. So you'll see one on the left and right side, and you will be able to tell which is which by my little mini description in the middle. So let's just jump right into it. And as you can see here, we have this little vampire witch on the left and the Woodland Youth 4 drawing on the right. Now the right one's going to take a little longer, so I'll talk about that in a second. So the concept for my vampire witch came from the idea of a witch who later in life also became a vampire, but not in your typical manner, more in a silly fashion where he gets bit by something like a Venus flytrap, and rather than having to suck necks for blood, he has to suck plants for chlorophyll. And that's like his bloodline. And that's why rather than having like a red undertone in his skin, it has more of a green undertone. And I always want butterflies surrounding him and things that are more happy and nature like and inviting. But him as a character wants to be seen as someone who is recognized for being spooky and scary. So it's very contradictory. And I like the play of this character who wants to be taken seriously so badly, but everything about him is so silly and not typical to what would make a vampire and or witch that I want to explore this character more. So as much as I love the idea of this character, I was still struggling with his cape and how he would look. I wanted it to have more of a, typical white mage look to it, but it's something I'll explore later. And then after that, I decided to do some feather experiments after seeing this sketch by Alan Williams, one of my favorite pencil artists, and it just had these really curly feathers. So I wanted to also do more of a study of it and then just see where it goes from there. So I probably won't take this drawing anywhere past this point because I feel like it was very reference heavy and I feel like it would be more just stealing Alan's feather work. But I do like what became of it and it's something that I want to explore more. So maybe you'll see more curly feathers for me in the future. Now on the right, for my Woodland Youth 4 drawing, I redraw this character every June, but I didn't really have a set plan going into this year specifically. And last year was my really big drawing where it had the 200 animals, and it was more of a time consuming effort, where this year I had about a week and a half to finish it. So I knew I had to plan my time efficiently and effectively to make this happen. And when I went into this drawing, I was like, well, I'll keep it simple. I'll just have the boy in the center and maybe some things floating around him, and the pig will be by his side. But then it kind of evolved into how I recently have been doing more research on the dairy industry. And I really wanted to make a statement. And even though it's a little bit more on the morbid side, I like the idea of exploring this kind of dark side of the Woodland Youth series and have more of like an intention behind it in a not so fun, loving, inviting way, but more in a dark, sad way. So that's where I went in that direction. And then on the left, I have my new concept of my character Buckley, who will actually be one of the main characters in Swordplay and is the first character you meet. And it is a redesign of my other character, who I was going to call Tim, and it was kind of self referential. And it had a kind of inside joke of how I think when people draw main characters in stories, they're basically just drawing themselves. So I was like, why change the name if this is just going to be who I am? But this character evolved into something more, and I don't really feel it's so much me as much as it is this other character, and I wanted to reflect that. So this is something I will be exploring further, and I'm excited to see where he goes. Now, back to my drawing with the Woodland Youth 4, the thing that came across near the end of exploring this concept was I wanted the cows in the background to be darker. And I wanted it to be represented by the idea that they're more or less a ghost of their former selves. And these baby calves won't actually get to see or meet their mothers. And I was going to have this very morbid depiction with their necks being slit in this gold liquid blood drawing upwards. And I did not think that this one would do well as like a concept print, but it's actually become one of my better sellers at con. So you never know. And then now on the left one, we have my back cover for my third book, my third sketchbook that came out in a Kickstarter earlier this year. And basically, I wanted two circles representing each year. So my 2017 and 2018 years. And I wanted like a little image within them. I didn't know what that image was going to be, but I wanted this very fanciful, almost to a gaudy extent of swirls and filigree and things interacting with one another. So a lot of what is going on here is me doing a lot of cleanup work of little selective areas and then doing a bunch of copy, rotating, pasting, and just figuring out how complex I want this sketch to be. And I had a lot of fun exploring this, but it was definitely, I think, a total of like 10 hours. And even though it's compressed into a time lapse, this one definitely hurt my wrist just because there was so much little tight, controlled edge erasing and adding that I actually don't recommend doing stuff like this if your hand is or your wrist is already kind of hurting. But I actually really like how it turned out. So you'll see the progression of that one. And I knew I wanted it to be kind of a mirror copy from the top and bottom. So what you're seeing is me focusing more on the top half, and then eventually you'll see it being flipped and turned on its head. And a lot of this was inspired by looking at like frames of the Baroque and Renaissance period and even modern artists like Jeremy Bastian. So I had a lot of fun with it because I like filigree, and this was definitely like an explosion of filigree. Now on the right side, I am working on my Denial Stage 1 drawing. So initially this was going to be for an Imagine Effects tutorial, but in the end they actually wanted me to do something simpler so that the reader, the viewer, could follow along and focus less on the extravagance of it and really get down to the core of what I was teaching. So you're going to see me first do this like very elaborate, very Muka design heavily influenced picture that eventually did not become the final. I actually shortened it and cropped everything besides the rabbit and really focused on just the rabbit. But this drawing I loved so much that I made it a piece on its own. And I knew that the 5-part series for Imagine FX had to somehow tie in with one another. I wanted there to be a story that was going to be underlying in the tutorial series. But since that didn't pan out, I stuck with the 5 theme, and instead of it being about tutorials, I really looked at my image and was trying to figure out what could be represented by the number 5. And then it really started to hit me that he had such like a blank expression. And when I think of the number 5, I think of the 5 stages of grief. And the first one fit perfectly with this drawing because he's carrying this rabbit that I eventually put thorns in, and it's hurt, and it's kind of representing grief. Yet he is looking so innocently, kind of blankly at the camera or at the viewer that it really does represent the first stage, which is denial. And I definitely played with that idea even more as I developed this drawing, but it was something that developed as I was working on the piece. And that happens in art, and it's like a beautiful process where you don't go into it with a set idea, and as you're working on it and as you are adding details or editing details out, the story sometimes speaks to you so clearly that it's hard not to follow that direction. And that's exactly what happened with this drawing, and it was a joy to work on, honestly. It definitely was a kind of a connection between my recent influences in a more Art Deco style, my influences on artists like Beth Kavanagh and Jaw Cooper, and definitely James Jean, where it's very like graphic and almost has more of a iconography detail to it. And I have been playing and experimenting with that more. So I think this drawing is actually a great representation of that and me having fun with it as well. So now on the left drawing, you see how much cleaner it is than it was a couple minutes ago. And this definitely represented the complexities that I wanted, I was aiming for the back cover. And I wanted it to just be this a mass of filigree, and it really came out in a way that I enjoyed. Now, figuring out how to do the cloth, I'm actually surprised I didn't keep this stage. I actually really like this stage, but I made it simpler. And I think just because it was getting so complicated that I eventually kind of cropped and filtered some things out. But looking back, I still kind of like it. I'm definitely attracted to busyness, and there's that other side of my brain though that's like, well, no, you want it to also read well. So they're always fighting with one another. And I think this back cover is definitely a good representation of that. Moving back to the right side, we have these extra flourishes and details that I'm adding to the denial drawing that I've really been doing to a lot of my drawings in the past couple years. And it's these extra details that I feel oftentimes go unnoticed, but really do add such a grandiose effect and appearance to the look of your drawings. And especially with something that has an Art Deco appearance and theme to it, it's these extra patient details that you're adding that will really make the image sing. And it's more of a trial of patience more than anything. And it really did make the piece kind of come together more than the direction I was taking it in before. So on the left side now, we have just some random sketches. And this will happen from time to time where I am going in with no idea of what's going to happen. And you just kind of get your hand warmed up for the day. You want to be more loose with your drawing. So oftentimes I'll do these really quick gestural and no meaning drawings. And that kind of gets me ready for what is now my mad bellhop drawing. And you'll see that progress. Going to the denial drawing, as I mentioned earlier, I simplified it to just the rabbit, but I still wanted to give something that was a little extra, so I added a double crown of thorns behind it and added a few more swirls. And if you can't tell from the mad bellhop time lapse, I was clearly scatterbrained trying to stay focused, and that will happen from time to time in my digital sketches. But eventually I made it my way back to it, and the idea of drawing this kind of crazy looking raven that was a bellhop for a hotel really intrigued me. So I had a lot of fun working on that one. Meanwhile, on the flip side, I was in the middle of June and Junicorn was happening. So I wanted to fit in a unicorn representation before the month ended, and this is what came out. It was a strange looking deer at first, and eventually it became more and more rat faced, and it was just a very strange drawing that progressed when I was behind the booth of Wisconsin Comic Con. But I had a lot of fun with it. It was the first time I worked with a dull pencil and worked more with large shapes of shading and creating my values that way. Now on the left side, we have this drawing I did during a Twitch live stream where basically I was open to suggestions and we created this image together. And in the end, it just became kind of a fun little exploration. Once again, very Art Deco heavy influenced. And it was just fun to work on. It was a good stream. I genuinely enjoyed it. And you can see here on the right side, I was trying to do something that was similar to my Shadow Prince drawing that I did, where there's a gradation and contrast for the value, but in the end, it ended up scrapping it because it looked too similar. And then from here, these were the starts of my storybook illustrations that I wanted to include in my third sketchbook. Something very reminiscent of those old classic storybook fable books, and they opened with such like a grandiose mannerism with these large block lettering, and I wanted to recreate that for my own book. So these were exploring, I believe there were 5 in the end, and I wanted each to feel unique but similar to one another, so I had to create somewhat of a template that each one would work off of and kind of have its own style and flair to each. And there we have it. So those were all my digital sketches that I did on my iPad Pro using Procreate, and I'm glad I got to share them with you guys and hopefully maybe inspire. So I plan on doing these periodically, so stay tuned for the next one, and thanks for watching.